She thought she was comforting a lonely child for just one night, until his father arrived and made it clear she had just stepped into a world where kindness is never forgotten and never released. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe. Snow drifted past the fogged windows of the community shelter as the holiday volunteers hurried around with cardboard boxes, strings of lights, and trays of hot cocoa. Soft music played from an old speaker, the kind that crackled every few seconds, but no one minded. It was Christmas Eve, and even the worn-out walls seemed to glow. Elena adjusted her volunteer badge and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear before heading toward the lobby, where the shelter always placed the big Christmas tree. Kids usually flocked to it, chattering over ornaments and arguing about who got to put the star on top. But tonight, there was only one child standing there. A small boy with dark, unruly curls and a red sweater too big for his frame. He held a glass ornament in his shaking hands, staring at the tree like it was a puzzle he wasn't sure he was allowed to touch. Elena slowed. Something about the way he stood, shoulders hunched, breath shallow, eyes darting, made her chest tighten. He looked afraid to exist too loudly. The coordinator passed behind her, whispering, "He came alone. Won't talk to anyone. Every time someone gets close, he jumps like he's expecting to be hit. Poor kid." Elena's heart cracked open. She approached slowly, careful not to startle him. "Hey there," she murmured gently. "That's a beautiful ornament you've got." The boy didn't answer, didn't look at her, didn't move. But she saw the slight tremor in his fingers, the way he was bracing for something. She lowered herself to her knees beside him, bringing her eyes closer to his level instead of towering above him. "Mind if I sit here?" No response, but he didn't run. Elena took that as an invitation. For a moment they simply sat there, the glow of the Christmas lights reflecting across the polished tile floor. When the boy finally glanced at her, his eyes were startling. Dark, guarded, full of stories he'd clearly never been safe enough to share. "You want to put it on the tree?" she asked. He hesitated, gripping the ornament tighter, so tight she thought it might shatter in his palm. "Here," she said softly, holding out her hands. "May I show you something?" Slowly, fearfully, he handed her the ornament. His fingers brushed hers for the briefest moment, and he flinched violently, pulling back as if expecting pain. Elena's breath caught. Whoever had taught him to fear touch, she wished she never met them. "It's okay," she whispered, voice warm and steady. "You can trust me." She held the ornament carefully, turning it in the light. "These break really easily, but if you hold them like this..." She placed the ornament back into his hands, guiding his small fingers gently around the top instead of the glass. This time he didn't flinch. His breath hitched, but he didn't pull away. "That's it," she murmured. "Now it won't fall." He looked down at their hands, her steady, his trembling, and slowly lifted the ornament toward the lowest branch. She didn't help him this time. She just watched. He hooked it onto the branch, stepping back cautiously as if expecting it to drop and shatter. When it didn't, a tiny puff of breath escaped him. Almost a laugh, but too soft to claim the name. Elena smiled. "You did it." The boy blinked, then turned to her with an expression that stole the air right from her lungs. He smiled. Just barely. But it was there. A small, fragile ember of joy. And then, as if realizing what he'd just done, he stepped closer and slipped his small hand into hers. Elena froze. Not because she didn't want the contact, but because he initiated it. This child who flinched at every sound, who guarded himself like a wounded animal, was holding on to her, tightly, as if he'd been waiting for someone to notice him. She squeezed back gently, warmth flooding her chest. "My name is Elena," she whispered. "What's yours?" No answer, but he didn't let go. Instead, he pressed his forehead against her arm, seeking comfort the way only a child who had gone too long without it ever would. And in that moment, Elena knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever he belonged to, whoever had let him walk alone into this shelter on Christmas Eve, had failed him. and she wasn't going to be another person who did. The crowd inside the shelter grew louder as more families filtered in for the evening meal, laughter bouncing against the decorated walls, children tugging at their parents' coats, holiday music weaving through the warm air. But in the middle of it all, Elena sat on the floor beside the Christmas tree with a little boy who refused to let go of her hand. Nico. She'd learned his name not because he spoke it, but because another child had run by earlier calling it. Nico hadn't responded, but Elena had seen the way his shoulders tightened, the way he listened without ever looking up. Now, though, he was different. He still didn't talk. Still watched the room like danger lurked behind every chair, but he hadn't stopped touching her. Fingers curled around her sleeve, small palm gripping her own, tiny steps shadowing hers whenever she moved. And every time she looked down at him, those dark eyes softened, just a fraction, but enough to tell her she'd become something to him tonight. Safety, maybe, warmth, a tether pulling him back from whatever memories haunted him. She helped him hang more ornaments, always waiting for him to guide the moment. He reached into the box, chose a silver star, and held it out with trembling hands. Elena steadied it, and together they lifted their arms to place it on a branch too high for him alone. When it hung without falling, Nico glanced up at her. A tiny smile curved his mouth. This one wasn't shy or accidental. It was real. Fragile, yes, but so painfully genuine, it felt like something inside Elena's chest cracked open to make room for it. "There it is," she whispered softly. "That smile is perfect." Nico pressed closer to her side, hiding his face in her coat, even as he leaned into the compliment. He didn't speak, but Elena didn't need words. Children had always been easier for her to read than adults, and Nico was broadcasting something loud and clear. "Don't leave me." So she didn't. Not for an hour. Not even when the coordinator asked her to help serve food. Nico gripped her hand so tightly, she worried he'd bruise himself. "It's okay," she told him gently. "I'll stay." He didn't let go. They ate together at a small table, Nico picking carefully at his macaroni and cheese, glancing at her between bites as if making sure she was still there. When one of the volunteers accidentally dropped a tray behind them, the loud crash sent Nico flinching violently, his hand clutching Elena's wrist like a lifeline. She soothed him quietly, covering his hand with both of hers until the tremor in his fingers eased. By the end of the night, most families had packed up and left. The shelter staff stacked chairs, swept floors, and gathered leftover decorations. It was only when the coordinator approached Elena with a worried expression that she realized something wasn't right. "His guardian still hasn't come," she murmured quietly. Glancing at Nico, "We've tried calling the number he gave us, but no one answered." Elena's heart sank. Nico's hand tightened in hers again, as if he sensed the tension in the air. She knelt beside him. "Sweetheart," she whispered, brushing a curl off his forehead. "Is someone supposed to pick you up?" He didn't speak, but he looked toward the door, toward the darkness outside. And then, slowly, he shook his head. Elena exchanged a look with the coordinator, a silent, aching exchange that said everything words couldn't. Someone had failed this boy. Again. "Do you know your address?" she asked softly. Nico hesitated, then nodded. Relief washed through her, but fear followed close behind. Where was he living? Who had left him alone on Christmas Eve? Why had no one answered the shelter's calls? "Elena," the coordinator whispered anxiously, "maybe we should call the police." At the word police, Nico froze. Completely. His breathing quickened, his eyes going wide with panic. He clutched Elena's hand with both of his, shaking his head violently. Silent, pleading, terrified. He didn't want the police. He wanted her. Elena swallowed hard and stood, lifting Nico into her arms. He relaxed the second her hands settled around him, burying his face against her shoulder. "It's okay," she murmured to the coordinator. "I'll take him home." "You sure? It could be across town." "I don't care," Elena said, tightening her hold on Nico. "He shouldn't walk alone. Not tonight." Nico's small hand fisted into her scarf as she stepped outside into the crisp winter air. Snowflakes drifted down like quiet blessings, clinging to his curls as he peeked up at her. "You'll show me the way," she whispered. He nodded once, pressing his forehead gently to her collarbone. Elena took a breath, steady, warm, determined, and began walking. Because for reasons she couldn't explain, she already knew. Wherever Nico led her, whatever home he belonged to. The moment she crossed that threshold, her life would never be simple again. Snow crunched under their boots as Elena followed Nico through winding, unfamiliar streets. The farther they walked, the quieter the neighborhood became. Houses grew larger, farther apart, darker. Holiday lights disappeared, replaced by tall iron gates and towering stone fences. Elena's nerves prickled, but Nico's small hand stayed tight in hers, guiding her with unwavering certainty. He wasn't lost. He knew exactly where he was going. They turned onto a long, secluded road, the kind where only the very wealthy or the very dangerous lived. At the end of it stood a mansion so enormous it seemed to absorb the moonlight. No wreath on the door, no lights in the windows, not a single trace of Christmas anywhere on the property. Just cold stone, tall gates, and shadowed figures stationed along the perimeter. Elena stopped breathing. Nico tugged her hand gently. "This is your home?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer. He nodded once, eyes dropping in a way that made her heart ache and chill at the same time. 2 guards stepped forward from the shadows, massive men in dark coats, hands near their weapons as they assessed the stranger holding the boss's child. Elena's pulse spiked. Her mouth went dry. One guard's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Identify yourself!" Before she could even speak, Nico stepped in front of her, gripping her hand tighter, glaring up at the man with surprising defiance. He didn't speak, but his message was clear. "Don't touch her." Recognition flickered in the guard's eyes. Not of her, of the boy. And instantly the man's entire expression changed from suspicion to shock. Then to alarm. "Madonna," he breathed, signaling the others with a sharp emotion. "It's the kid. He's home. Call the boss." The other guard tapped his earpiece, urgency tightening his posture. "We found him." "Yes, sir. He's at the gate. No, he's not alone." Elena's stomach dropped. This was a mistake. A massive one. She should have taken Nico back to the shelter, called someone, anyone else. But she'd seen the terror in the boy's eyes at the mention of police. She couldn't force him into a situation that frightened him. Still, this? Where was she? What had she just walked into? The gates groaned open, metal scraping against metal. Nico tugged her forward, stepping confidently through the threshold, and she, helplessly attached to his hand, followed. As they crossed into the estate, an almost physical wave of tension hit her. More guards emerged, weapons visible now, scanning the grounds, the road behind her, the trees. Searching for threats. Searching for whoever could have taken the boss's son. Every instinct in Elena screamed for her to turn around and run, but Nico's small hand shook in hers, and that kept her anchored. He needed her, and she had promised him she wouldn't leave. They reached the front steps just as heavy footsteps echoed inside the foyer. The enormous double doors burst open, slamming against the walls. A man filled the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive black coat dusted with snow. His presence hit her like a physical force, cold, severe, dangerous in a way that made the air thicken. Matteo Devereaux. Elena had never seen him in person, but she recognized him instantly. Anyone in the city would. His face appeared in every whispered rumor, every news headline that couldn't quite say what he'd done. And right now, he looked like a storm ready to tear the world apart. His eyes, dark, sharp, penetrating, locked onto Nico first. The boy froze, his fingers trembling in Elena's grip. That brief flicker of fear in Nico's posture made Elena's chest ache. Then Matteo's gaze shifted. To her. His eyes dragged slowly from her coat to their joined hands, then up to her face. Calculating. Cold. Dangerous. "Who?" he said, voice low and lethal. "Are you?" Elena swallowed hard. Her voice nearly failed her. "My name is Elena. He was at the shelter. No one came for him, so you brought him here." His words weren't a question. They were an accusation, cutting and sharp enough to flay her alive. "I just wanted to keep him safe," she whispered. For a heartbeat, the world went utterly silent. Then Matteo moved. Not toward her, toward his son. He dropped to a knee in front of Nico, this terrifying man, this infamous monster, and cupped the boy's face in shaking hands. "Nico," he breathed, and the raw relief in that single word hit Elena like a punch. "I've been searching for you for hours." Nico didn't speak, but his eyes filled, and he stepped quickly into his father's arms, burying his face in Matteo's coat. Elena exhaled shakily, overwhelmed by the tenderness she hadn't expected to see from a man like him. But then Matteo stood again, and his gaze pinned her in place, sharper than any weapon on the property. "You shouldn't have brought him here," he said quietly. "You shouldn't even know where I live." Elena's heart stuttered in fear, but before she could respond, Nico tugged her hand again, brave, small, unwilling to let her go. Matteo saw it, and something in his expression shifted. Not softer, not safer, but infinitely more dangerous, because she realized in that chilling moment that she had just stepped, uninvited, into the life of a man who let no one close. And his son had chosen her. Snow pooled around Matteo Devereaux's boots as he crossed the threshold, his coat still dripping from the frantic search that had consumed him for hours. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscle twitched along the edge, and his eyes, sharp, predatory, wild with fear, swept the foyer like a man expecting to find a corpse instead of a child. His guards stood in rigid silence. They had never seen him like this. Matteo Devereaux did not panic. He did not lose control. He did not search. Others searched for him. But tonight, the veneer had cracked. "Nico!" he barked, voice rougher than Elena expected from a man so composed mere hours ago. Beside her, the little boy stiffened. Not in fear, she'd seen that before, but in recognition. Like he had been waiting for this moment with an anxiety that mirrored his father's. Elena squeezed his hand gently and gave him a small nod. It was enough. Nico stepped forward, still clutching her fingers, and the moment Matteo saw him, truly saw him, his entire body seemed to stop moving. First, relief crashed over his features, raw and unfiltered. Then the panic that had been simmering beneath his skin flared into anger. Not at Nico, but at the world, at fate, at the threat of losing the only thing that mattered to him. But then, something else entirely flickered through his expression. Shock. Absolute bone-deep shock. Because Nico, who wouldn't speak, who didn't allow touch, who shrank from even the gentlest reach, was holding Elena's hand. Not just holding it, clinging to it, and smiling. A small, shy, barely there smile, but a smile all the same. Matteo froze as though someone had pressed a gun to his spine. His eyes darted between their joined hands, then to her face, then back to Nico's quiet, soft expression. His voice dropped to a whisper, disbelieving. "He's smiling." Elena felt her heart squeeze. He's been really brave tonight. Matteo's gaze snapped to her so sharply, she felt it like heat against her skin. There was nothing polite or distant in that look. It was piercing, like he was trying to tear her apart cell by cell to understand how she had accomplished something. No doctor, no therapist, no relative had managed in nearly 2 years. Nico tugged her hand again, stepping closer to her side, as if needing her presence to anchor him. The movement hit Matteo harder than any bullet could have. His breath shuddered. "Nico," he murmured, voice breaking on the edges. "Come here." The boy took one step forward, then stopped, hesitating, glancing up at Elena as though asking permission. Permission to go to his own father. The realization cracked something open in Matteo's chest. Elena saw it, the flash of grief, The sting of guilt, the terrible, ugly fear of failing the child he was raising alone. Elena nodded softly to Nico. "It's okay. He's been looking for you." That was enough. Nico moved into his father's arms, burying his face in Matteo's coat. Matteo dropped to one knee so quickly, Elena startled. He held his son tightly. Not too tight, but with the desperation of a man who had imagined every possible outcome tonight, including the worst. His fingers trembled against Nico's back. "You scared me," he whispered into his son's hair. "I thought—" He cut himself off, swallowing hard. Elena stepped back, giving them space. But Matteo's eyes snapped up, following her movement as though he couldn't let her out of his sight quite yet. He rose slowly, his hand still resting protectively on Nico's shoulder. "You found him?" he asked, voice still raw. "Yes," Elena replied quietly. "He was at the shelter. Nobody came for him. He looked lost." Matteo's eyes narrowed at the implication. He shouldn't have been alone. He turned to his nearest guard, voice lethal. "Find out who let him slip away. They won't work another day under my roof." Elena stiffened. It wasn't their fault. Nico wanted space. He trusted me. That's all. Matteo looked at her long and hard, taking in every inch of her face, as though searching for an ulterior motive, a hidden agenda, anything that made sense. Finally, he exhaled. He hasn't let anyone touch him since his mother died. Elena's heart dropped. I didn't know." "No one was supposed to," Matteo said, more to himself than to her. "No doctors, no teachers, not even me some days." Nico pressed closer to her side again, tugging her hand. It was instinctive, unconscious, proof that whatever fragile bond had formed tonight was not an accident. Matteo saw it. Matteo understood it, and Matteo did not like being confused. His gaze darkened in a way that wasn't threatening her, but was undeniably dangerous, because Elena had become something he couldn't categorize, couldn't predict, couldn't control. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what exactly did you do to earn my son's smile?" Elena swallowed. "Nothing special. I just listened and stayed." Matteo's jaw tightened. He looked again at Nico's small hand latched around hers, then back at her, and in that moment something shifted behind his eyes. Not softness, not kindness, but a silent, possessive kind of realization. She had done what no one else could. She had become the one person Nico reached for. And Matteo Devereaux never let go of what became important. The foyer was too big, too cold, too quiet for a child to feel safe in, but Nico didn't seem to notice any of that. The moment Matteo's voice sharpened, low and crackling with something Elena could only describe as barely leashed fury, Nico stepped back from his father and pressed himself into Elena's side instead. His small fingers curled tightly into her coat, his face half hidden in the fabric. Elena froze. Matteo did too. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The guards standing along the walls shifted their weight, uneasy. They weren't used to seeing their boss rattled. They weren't used to seeing him human. But this shook him. His eyes flicked from Nico's trembling hands to Elena's startled expression, something unreadable slicing across his features. Shock, hurt, wonder, all of it buried under the thick, cold mask of a man who'd forgotten how to feel anything safely. "What," Matteo said, voice barely more than a whisper, "did you do to earn his smile?" The question wasn't gentle. It wasn't curious. It was an interrogation, sharp enough to cut, heavy enough to crush. Elena swallowed hard. "I didn't do anything." "Try again." He stepped closer. His tone was calm, but too calm, each word precise, controlled, dangerous. The kind of calm a predator used before deciding whether something was a threat, or something far more valuable. "I'm not repeating myself," he murmured. Nico flinched at the shift in his father's voice and pressed even tighter against Elena's hip, his fingers clutching her coat like she was the only solid thing in the room. She instinctively reached down and laid a gentle hand on his back, feeling the tiny hitch of his breath against her ribs. It was such a natural gesture that Mateo's jaw tightened visibly. "No one," he said quietly, "touches him like that." Elena blinked. "He touched me. I just followed his lead." Mateo inhaled sharply, the first crack in his composure. "He hasn't let anyone near him since—" He stopped, jaw flexing, grief flashing like lightning behind his eyes. "Since his mother," he finished, voice tight. Elena's chest ached. "I didn't know. I just sat with him. That's all." Mateo stared at her like she had spoken in a language he'd never heard. "You're telling me you simply walked into a room, and my son, who recoils from his own family, decided to take your hand?" She nodded slowly. "He looked lonely." "Lonely?" Mateo echoed, the word hitting him like a knife. "He's surrounded by the best staff money can buy." "He's surrounded," Elena said softly, "but he isn't seen." The silence that followed was brutal. Mateo's eyes narrowed, studying her with an intensity that made her want to step back, and an intensity that made stepping back impossible. He wasn't angry at her. He wasn't angry at Nico. He was furious at a truth he didn't want to acknowledge. Elena felt Nico tremble again. She leaned down slightly. "You're okay," she whispered, brushing a stray curl off his forehead. "No one is upset with you." Mateo flinched, actually flinched, because Nico, his son, the child who had lived inside silent grief for 2 years, relaxed at her voice. Not his. "Elena," Mateo said, her name emerging like a pulled thread, unraveling something inside him. "Look at him." She did. Nico was gazing up at her with such trust it made her throat tighten. "That," Mateo murmured hoarsely, "that right there. Tell me what you did." "I just didn't leave him," she whispered. Mateo's expression shattered, just for a breath. A softening, a collapse, a memory of a man he must have once been, long before this house grew cold, and his world grew cruel. "And now," he said quietly, "he thinks you're his." The words hit her like a physical force. "That's not," she began, but Nico tugged her coat again, confirming it without a single word. Mateo exhaled slowly, deeply, like he was grounding himself against something overwhelming. "Doctors couldn't reach him," he said. "Therapists couldn't reach him. Even I," his voice faltered, "even I can't reach him the way you do." Elena's heart pounded. "It was just one night. I don't—" "One night," Mateo repeated, his gaze dropping to their still linked hands, "was all it took for him to give you what he hasn't given anyone in 2 years. And then, slowly, dangerously, something shifted in Mateo's eyes. Recognition, claim, decision. He straightened, his voice low and final. "I need you to stay." Elena's breath caught. "What?" "My son," he said, stepping closer, "has chosen you." His gaze swept over her, softening for the first time. Not with warmth, but with something heavier. "And I don't ignore what my son chooses." Nico pressed into her side again, sealing the truth with a quiet, trembling gesture. Elena felt the world tilt. She hadn't just found a lost child tonight. She had stepped directly into the life and the grasp of Mateo Devereaux, a man who did not trust anyone. Except somehow, her. Elena didn't remember agreeing to let Mateo drive her home. One moment she was kneeling beside Nico, trying to coax him toward bed. The next, Mateo was issuing orders in that low, commanding tone that made grown men snap to attention. "Prepare the car." "Escort Miss Alvarez." "No, I'll take her myself." The last order froze the entire foyer. His guards exchanged looks, some startled, some wide-eyed, all quietly panicking. Mateo Devereaux did not drive people home. He didn't accompany anyone unless he intended to intimidate or interrogate them. Yet here he was, holding Nico with one arm and motioning for Elena with the other. "Come," he said, his voice smooth but threaded with something dangerous and intimate. "I'll take you." Elena opened her mouth to protest. "I can call a cab." "No." His tone snapped the word in half. "You walked my son across the city. You will not walk anywhere alone tonight. Nico tugged her coat again, softly pleading. Elena's resistance folded immediately. Mateo's gaze flicked down at his son's hand, then back to her, softened by something so rare the guards actually stiffened at the sight of it. He was softening. For her. The ride was silent, at least at first. Mateo's sleek, black SUV moved like a ghost through the city streets, windows tinted so heavily the outside world disappeared. Elena sat in the back beside Nico, who leaned against her side, drifting in and out of sleep. Mateo rode in the opposite seat, angled toward them, a dark silhouette backlit by the glow of passing streetlights. He didn't look away from her. Not once. Finally, Elena cleared her throat, needing to say something before she suffocated under the weight of his attention. "You don't have to do this," she murmured. "Drive me home. Assign guards. Any of it. I'm nobody." Mateo leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "You brought my son home." "He found me," she corrected softly. "I just walked him back." "And he smiled," Mateo added, voice low, controlled. "At you." Elena's heart skipped. Children smile at kindness. "Nico doesn't," Mateo said quietly. "Not anymore." The car fell silent again. Outside, snow drifted across the windshield. Inside, the air thickened with all the things Mateo wasn't saying. He watched Nico's sleeping face for a long moment before lifting his eyes to her again. "How did you know what he needed?" he asked. "Everyone else overwhelms him." Elena brushed a hand over Nico's hair. He wasn't overwhelmed. Just alone. Mateo inhaled softly, as if her words landed somewhere deep inside him. "My son," he murmured, "has been alone even in a room full of people." Elena met his gaze. "So have you." The effect was instant. His expression froze. His jaw tightened. Even the driver tensed, eyes flicking up nervously in the mirror. Elena felt heat rise in her chest. "I didn't mean—" "You're observant," Mateo said, interrupting her gently. A whisper, not a threat. "Most people see what I allow. You see what I've hidden." "I didn't. That's why I'm driving you home." She blinked. "To interrogate me?" He shook his head, slowly, deliberately. "To understand you." Her pulse fluttered in her throat. Mateo's stare was too intense, too searching, too intimate. "You speak about him," he continued, "like you've known him longer than one evening." Elena swallowed. "Children tell you who they are if you listen. That's all I did." "You listened," Mateo echoed, voice rough in a way she hadn't heard before. "And he responded." His hand curled loosely into a fist on his knee, as though he were fighting some internal war. "My men have served me for decades," he said. "My lieutenants would die for me, but none of them know my son the way you do after one night." "I don't know him," she whispered. "You do," Mateo said. "You saw him." The way he said "saw him" made her chest tighten. The driver slowed as they neared her apartment building. Mateo leaned forward, his gaze flicking to the shadowed street outside with distaste. "You live here?" he asked, voice slicing through the quiet. "Yes," she whispered, embarrassed despite herself. "It's unsafe." "It's what I can afford." Mateo didn't respond right away. His gaze drifted from the cracked sidewalk to the dimly lit doorway, and something in him darkened. Not with judgment, but with resolve. Nico shifted in his sleep, his head slipping from Elena's shoulder. Instinctively, she steadied him, sliding an arm around his small body to keep him from waking. Mateo watched her do it, and something inside him snapped into place. A decision, a promise, a claim. He spoke quietly, but every word vibrated through the space between them. "Elena," he said, "I do not soften for anyone." Her breath hitched. "But with you." He paused as though choosing the next sentence carefully. "I am beginning to understand why my son smiled." The car stopped. Mateo didn't move. He didn't look away. And Elena realized with a sudden dizzying rush that this wasn't just gratitude. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous, something he wasn't planning to let go. Snow hammered against the shelter windows, rattling the thin panes as if the storm itself were trying to claw its way inside. Elena stayed late again, sorting donated coats into piles. Too small, too worn, too perfect to throw away. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a lonely kind of soundtrack to an otherwise empty room. She didn't hear the side door open. She felt it. Soft footfalls, hesitant breaths, that familiar presence before she even turned. "Nico?" she whispered. The little boy stood dripping snow onto the floor, shoulders trembling under a coat he hadn't zipped. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, his eyes wide and wet. Not from tears, but from fear that he'd be sent away. "Oh," Elena breathed, kneeling quickly. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here? You can't be out alone, it's freezing." He didn't answer. He simply stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her neck, pressing his small face firmly into her shoulder. Her heart cracked open. She hugged him back without hesitation, whispering, "Hey, it's okay. You're safe. You found me." When she eased him back, his fingers clung to her sweater as if letting go was unthinkable. A loud crash made her jump, the front doors slamming against the wall under the force of someone entering far too sharply to be normal. "Elena!" The boom of Matteo Devereaux's voice tore through the shelter like a warning shot. He strode inside, furious enough to make the air tremble around him. Snow still clinging to the shoulders of his black coat. His men flooded in behind him, but they stopped when he lifted a single hand. His eyes were locked on only one thing: Nico, or rather, Nico in her arms. The boy startled at the sound of his father's voice, flinching in a way Elena didn't understand until she saw Matteo's expression fully. It wasn't anger at Nico, it was fear. Raw, unguarded terror. Matteo crossed the room faster than a breath, dropping to his knees beside them. His hands hovered over Nico, checking him for injuries with frantic precision. "Did someone take you?" Matteo demanded, voice low and shaking. "Did someone touch you? Tell me, Nico. Tell me now." Nico only buried himself deeper into Elena's side. Matteo's fury faltered. "Elena," he said, lifting his gaze to her. And for the first time since she'd met him, Matteo Devereaux looked lost. He was gone. His guards didn't see him slip out. The cameras didn't catch him. "I thought—" His voice broke off, strangled. Elena rested a gentle hand on Nico's back. "He came here. To find me." She hadn't meant it as a blow, but Matteo inhaled sharply, the meaning slicing right through him. His son ran through a blizzard to reach her. "Why?" Nico answered without words. He tugged Elena's sleeve, pressing his forehead to hers, eyes closing in relief. "Matteo," she whispered, soft but steady. "He's safe. He wasn't running from you. He was running to something he needed." Something. Someone. Nico's breath trembled, and Elena lowered hers to match it. "It's all right," she murmured to him, brushing snow from his hair. "I'm right here." Nico relaxed, just like that. Matteo watched the transformation as if witnessing a miracle. His rage, the storm that had burst through the shelter doors, melted in real time. Fury dissolved into awe. Awe softened into longing. Longing sharpened into something possessive and unspoken. "Elena," he whispered, her name sounding like a confession he never meant to say out loud. She swallowed, caught off guard by the way his eyes lowered to her mouth before flicking back to meet her gaze again. The temperature in the room changed. Not warmer, not colder, but electric. Dangerous, in a different way. "I yelled for him," Matteo murmured, voice roughened by emotion. "He didn't come." Elena held Nico tighter. "But he came for me." Matteo closed his eyes for one agonizing second. When he opened them again, everything about him was different. The fear was gone. The rage was gone. What remained was terrifying in its clarity. "I don't know what you're doing to him," Matteo said quietly. "But I can't." His jaw clenched. "I won't lose the only reason he smiles." She felt her pulse jump. "Matteo." "And I won't lose the woman who makes him smile," he continued, voice lowering until it felt like it wrapped around her. "Not to the storm, not to the world, not to anything." He reached out, not to touch her, but to brush one trembling strand of Nico's hair from her cheek, a gesture so gentle it nearly broke her. "This," he whispered, eyes burning into hers, "this changed everything." Nico's small fingers curled tighter into Elena's sweater, and in Mateo's next breath, she heard the truth he didn't dare say out loud. "You're not leaving my sight again." It started the very next morning. Elena woke to the sound of deep voices outside her apartment door, low, disciplined, unmistakably dangerous. Her heartbeat kicked into a sprint as she tiptoed toward the peephole. 2 men, black coats, expressionless faces. One of them stood directly outside her door, arms crossed, like a silent warning to anyone who might walk by. Another waited at the bottom of the stairs. Her breath left her in a trembling rush. Guards. Mateo's guards. Before she could even decide whether to open the door or call someone, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "They stay until I arrive." The floor seemed to sway beneath her. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't agreed, hadn't even thought, no, dared to consider that last night's storm of emotions and confessions would spill into the daylight. But Matteo Devereaux didn't ask. He acted, and clearly he had acted the moment she and Nico had disappeared into the shelter's hallway the night before. Elena slipped into a sweater and cracked the door open. The guard nearest her straightened immediately, giving a respectful nod. It would have been comforting if he didn't look like he had a small armory hidden under his coat. "Miss Elena," he greeted, "we will accompany you wherever you need to go." Excuse me?" she stammered. Another guard stepped closer. "Mr. Devereaux's orders." Of course they were. She rubbed a hand over her face. "I didn't ask for—" "He said you'd say that," the man replied calmly. Of course he did. She barely had time to process before a sleek black car turned the corner onto her street, stopping with silent precision. The back door opened, and Matteo stepped out. Not storming, not raging. Controlled, focused. Scanning her entire block with a gaze sharp enough to slice through concrete. "Elena," he called softly. Just her name. But her pulse reacted immediately. He approached with long, purposeful strides, his coat sweeping behind him, the cold morning air bending away from the heat in his presence. He dismissed his men with a flick of his fingers, yet they lingered within sight, obeying only to a point. Matteo stopped a foot away from her. "Someone leaked that Nico spent the night with a stranger," he said, voice low and steady, and that he smiled. The word smiled carried an emotion she didn't want to decipher. Elena swallowed. "Why does that matter to anyone?" "Because my son is my greatest weakness," Matteo murmured. "And last night, the moment he showed someone else trust, every rival I have realized something." His eyes locked on hers, burning with a fire that made her chest tighten. "They realized they could use you." The words hit her harder than she expected. "Elena," Matteo continued, stepping closer, "you didn't just help my son. You became part of his world. My world." Her breath caught. "And that world is full of people who would destroy anything that makes him happy." She felt the truth of it, cold and heavy in her stomach. The silent guards outside her door. The whisper of threats she didn't hear. The shadow of Matteo's enemies stretching toward her without warning. She hadn't asked for any of this, but she had walked Nico home. She had been the one to coax out his first smile in months. She had held him when he trembled and chosen to protect him without thinking twice. Actions always had consequences, and Matteo Devereaux never let a debt go unpaid. "Matteo," she whispered, "I don't need protection." "Yes," he interrupted, his tone soft but unyielding. "You do." He lifted a hand, slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to pull back. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted every terrifying rumor about him. "My son chose you," he said, "and I trust his instincts more than my own." Her heart thudded painfully. "So, understand this, Elena." His hand slipped from her cheek to the back of her neck, not possessive, but grounding. anchoring her against the whirlwind he knew he was about to unleash. "You protected my son," he said, voice dropping to a vow. "Now I protect you." She opened her mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to thank him, maybe to beg him not to drag her deeper into a life she didn't understand. But Mateo leaned in just enough to silence the panic rising in her. "No one touches you," he murmured. "No one threatens you. Not while my heart beats." The words settled over her like a blanket woven from danger and safety, and something she didn't dare name. Because it wasn't just a promise, it was a claim. And Mateo Devereaux never made claims lightly. The storm came without warning. Elena had just finished washing the last dish of the night when a strange quiet settled over her apartment. Not peaceful quiet, the wrong kind, the kind that makes every hair on your body rise. She froze, dish towel in hand. The building was old. She knew every creak, every shift of the walls during winter. But this sound, this silence, felt foreign. Heavy, expectant. She turned off the faucet. Something scraped outside her door. Not footsteps, not the familiar weight of Mateo's guards shifting position. This sound was softer, sneakier. A gloved hand against wood. Elena's pulse spiked. She took one cautious step backward. The lights cut out. Her breath caught, sharp and terrified. The apartment dropped into blackness, the only glow coming from the street lamp filtering weakly through her curtains. "Elena." A whisper, not spoken aloud but inside her mind. The memory of Mateo's warning. "They will use you to get to me." Before she could reach for her phone, her bedroom window shattered. A man in a dark mask climbed through the frame, boots crunching over broken glass. Elena gasped and stumbled back, only to hear the second window give way. Another intruder. Her front doorknob rattled violently. They were surrounding her, closing in. Her legs trembled so hard she barely stayed upright. "Got her!" one of the men growled. Elena bolted for the hallway, heart hammering, but the apartment wasn't big enough to escape. A hand grabbed her arm, yanking her back. She screamed, high, panicked, raw, but before her scream even reached its full volume, the entire apartment shook. Her door didn't open. It exploded inward. A dark figure moved through the smoke and splintered wood like a phantom unleashed from hell. Mateo. Not in a suit. Not composed or controlled. Not the man who whispered to Nico at bedtime or offered Elena soft words when she was overwhelmed. This was the man the criminal underworld feared. He struck the first intruder before the man could even turn. One brutal, precise blow that sent him crashing into the wall. The second attacker lunged from behind, but Mateo spun, expression carved from ice, and disarmed him with terrifying speed. A gun clattered to the floor. Another movement, a flash of metal, and Mateo had the third man pinned, weapon pressed to the intruder's throat. All three were down in less than 10 seconds. Elena stood frozen, mouth open, chest heaving, staring at him like he was something out of myth. Mateo finally turned toward her. The moment he saw her, shivering, cornered, fear hollowing her eyes, something in him broke. "Elena." He crossed the space between them in a heartbeat, his weapon dropping from his hand without a thought. His fingers found her face, trembling harder than hers, sweeping over her cheeks, her jaw, her hair, as if needing to physically confirm she was whole. "Did they touch you?" he rasped. "Tell me they didn't." I'm okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure it was true, not with adrenaline shaking her bones. Mateo cupped her face fully now, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't even felt slip down. His breath hitched, unsteady. Mateo Devereaux, afraid. "If anything had happened to you..." He paused, voice cracking in a way that shattered her heart. Nico would lose more than his mother. Elena went still. "Mateo..." He would lose the only person who made him feel safe, the only person who brought him joy. Mateo leaned his forehead to hers, gripping her like she was the only anchor he had left in the world. He would lose the woman who brought him back to me. Her breath trembled. His next words were barely a whisper. "And I would lose the one person I can't afford to lose. Not now. Not ever. Elena's hands rose shakily, resting against his chest. Not to push him away, but because she needed to feel something solid. Something real. Matteo pulled her into him, arms locking around her in a hold that was equal parts protection and desperation. "You are safe now," he murmured against her hair. "I swear it." Behind him, his men finally burst in, flooding the apartment with light and weapons drawn. But Matteo didn't look away from her, didn't release her, didn't let anyone come between them. Because tonight she hadn't just been a target. She had become his breaking point. Snow fell softly over the Devereaux mansion, blanketing its dark stone walls in a gentleness the house had never known. Usually it stood like a fortress, cold, watchful, impenetrable. But tonight, golden lights glowed through every window, casting warmth into the winter night. Elena stepped inside slowly, still shaken from the midnight attack, still unsure how she'd gone from a volunteer at a shelter to someone being ushered into bulletproof cars and guarded hallways. Matteo's home brimmed with quiet luxury, but what caught her breath wasn't the wealth. It was the transformation. Christmas lights, garlands, a tree, an enormous one, decorated clumsily but lovingly, and Nico sitting cross-legged on the floor beside it. When he saw her, he shot to his feet, a blur of excitement she'd never seen from him before. He sprinted across the room and crashed into her legs, hugging her with an intensity that squeezed tears from her eyes. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, dropping to her knees to hold him. "I'm okay." Nico pulled back, scanning her face the way Matteo had the night before, as if he needed every detail to be perfect to believe she was safe. Satisfied, he tugged her toward the tree, his little hands insistent and warm in hers. Matteo watched from the doorway, not with his usual guarded intensity, not with the cold, dangerous calculation she was used to seeing him wear like armor. Tonight he looked human, softened, as if watching her and Nico together was the one thing powerful enough to steal the breath from his lungs. Nico dug through a box beside the tree, searching for something specific. When he found it, he turned to Elena and placed a small ornament in her hands, a simple wooden heart, painted red, with a loop of twine for hanging. Elena's throat tightened. "Is this for me?" she asked quietly. Nico nodded. Then very deliberately he touched 3 fingers to his chin and moved them outward, family, before placing his small hand over his heart. Elena felt the world tilt. "Nico!" Her voice cracked, and she covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "Sweetheart, you don't have to." But he already was wrapping his arms around her, resting his cheek on her shoulder, with the kind of trust she knew he didn't give easily. The kind of trust no one had been able to earn since the day his world shattered. She held him, tears slipping down her cheeks. A warmth pressed against her back. Matteo stepping close enough that she felt his presence before she felt his touch. One large hand settled at her waist, firm but gentle, grounding her in a moment that felt too big, too fragile. His voice was low, almost a breath. "He hasn't signed that word since he lost her." Elena's heart stuttered. Matteo's hand tightened slightly, his thumb brushing the curve of her waist, as if he couldn't help it. "You didn't just save my son," he murmured, voice deepening with emotion he rarely let slip. "You brought him back. You gave him something I couldn't." Elena turned her head, meeting his eyes over her shoulder. The man who looked back at her was not the feared kingpin of the city, not the ruthless fighter from last night, not even the father who loved his son more than anything. This was Matteo stripped bare, unhidden, unmasked. "Stay," he whispered. For him, her breath caught. And his fingers slid just slightly along her waist, a confession in a single movement. "Stay for me." The words settled around her like falling snow, soft, quiet, impossible to ignore. Elena looked down at Nico still holding her hand, at the heart-shaped ornament, at the tree waiting for one last piece. She rose slowly, lifting Nico so he could place the ornament on the highest branch he could reach. He leaned into her, his small hand gripping her shoulder for balance. Behind her, Matteo's hand remained at her waist, steady and warm. And in that moment, Elena understood with a clarity that stole her breath. She hadn't just comforted a lonely boy in a shelter. She hadn't just protected a frightened child. She had stepped, unknowingly, quietly, into the empty spaces both of them had carried for far too long. Nico needed her. Matteo wanted her. And she no longer felt the urge to run. The heart ornament glimmered under the lights. Nico smiled at her. Matteo exhaled slowly behind her, like a man who'd finally found something he'd been searching for. Elena felt the truth settle inside her like a warm ember. This wasn't the Christmas she expected. It was better. It was theirs.